Every body is a book of blood. Wherever we're opened, we're red.
Have you checked the children? You're a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes that is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Bienvenidos, hellacious, hedonistic heathens, and welcome once more to my monthly segment here on the horror show, Barker at the Moon. Ha ha ha! That is right, and yes, obviously, welcome to the horror show, and I am very stoked to be talking about the 5th installment, that's Reezy, of the Books of Blood. Yeah, so I have covered the previous 4 in, you know, incessant interest and just enjoyed them significantly. Dare I say, though, this might be the first one where I'm getting into that new bit of, this new reputation of the fact that Fuego doesn't like stuff. I had somebody just the other day, they're like, oh, I'm assuming Cecil loved the new Doctor Strange, and then, you know, Jaime was like, I didn't quite like this, so on and so forth. No, it's not that, not the case. I actually enjoyed that film quite a bit, but no, this is the first one, as far as all the Barker stuff, where I am gonna really centralize on one particular installment because of the fact that I felt like in the flesh, the 4th and final story from the 4th volume of the Books of Blood was definitely the standout, and when it was initially released in the United States back in the 80s, it was actually that was the title that they went with, you know, before they started collecting all of these into the 3 and then 3 sort of collectives and stuff. And so yeah, but there are 3 other stories in this 5th volume of Books of Blood by Clive Barker. And I'm actually not going to be talking about The Forbidden, and that's because of the fact that The Forbidden was adapted into, waha, that's right, CANDYMAN, the amazing Tony Todd film, which just had its, like, spiritual sequel of sorts, you know, in the last year, which was good, but not great in my estimation. Yeah, so myself and Robert Duell here in the horror show have been talking about how we want to do a video that compares and contrasts the Forbidden short story with how it was adapted and just the amazingness of that particular film. And so, yeah, I mean, just to briefly touch upon it, I like it, but I don't love it, you know, as far as the short story goes. Like, the adaptation with the reappropriation and moving it to Chicago and everything, like, that's what really, I feel like, gave a significantly more distinctive flavor, you know, and not even just from, like, an ethnic standpoint, you know, with the fact that, you know, that with, like, a largely black cast and stuff, but, yeah, it's, like, the short story is brief, and it's, you know, covering this, you know, woman at the university who's, like, studying graffiti art and stuff, and then that's where she starts to find stuff out. But it's interesting because of the fact that The Forbidden really lays the claim for a theme that's explored in our 2nd story, which is about, you know, gentrification and trying to go and reappropriate places that, as far as, like, you know, property and stuff like that goes, and to just have them just revamped and revitalized and turned into something, you know, that can be, like, poignant and interesting once again. And that is, in fact, what we get in the 2nd story, which is the Madonna. And the thing about the Madonna that's very, very interesting is, so that I talked about this in the previous segment, in the fact that, so there is a comic series called Tapping the Vein. And Tapping the Vein was adaptations in a, you know, like, graphic novel sort of standpoint of Clive's Books of Blood stories. And so there's 4 different volumes, and this is, in fact, the 4th one, and it adapts the Madonna. I must admit that I liked it, I didn't love it. I mean, it was really the art that I, you know, wasn't, like, super into, and then also from just a standpoint of where you have so much exposition, you know, with, like, the, like, story block stuff, as opposed to actual dialogue amongst characters. That's the one thing that sometimes, despite being, like, a major comic lover, I have my occasional issues. But yeah, I think I showed it previously, but I just have to show once again just how weird, and it's not even like bearing the story, but yeah, that might get us blocked here on YouTube. Oopsies. Oopsie. But yeah, so the Madonna is an interesting one because of the fact that to get back to the gentrification aspect, so there's this guy Jerry, and he is trying desperately to get this guy with unsavory money to purchase this property that was, you know, once upon a time, you know, just like a staple, a standpoint, you know, of sorts. And so, yeah, he doesn't even really have like proper rights to it, but he goes and he shows Ezra around, and they see that there are these two pools there specifically, and there is a witchly presence, almost like a siren sort of presence, I guess is like the best way that I can describe it. So and you're like, yeah, I'm seeing these nubile naked young women there, and Jerry like doesn't see it at first. It's the investor initially, and that's what really like flips the switch, and he's just like, yeah, we got to have some further meetings, let's get this done, despite the fact that initially that dude is like waiting for like 30 minutes for this appointment, and he's like, yeah, someday I'm going to be successful enough and people are going to wait on me, that sort of thing. And so it turns into, without spoiling, as I all too often, you know, try to approach these sort of stories, it's got eloquent, amazing prose, which you would pretty much always expect from Clive, but yet it was the simplicity of the storytelling in this particular one that just did not do it that much for me. You know, he's having some relational strife with, you know, his significant other Carol, and they're just kind of back and forth bickering and so on and so forth, and yet he is drawn back, you know, time and time again to this weird witchly presence, I guess, you know, and just this sort of energy. And without spoiling things, like the twist in this, I just was not particularly about it. I was just like, oh, that's funny. Clive is kind of trolling a little bit. Although, you know, there is something interesting where he is describing going into like the earthly energy of water late in this particular bit. So let's read that really quickly. So the water was rapidly frenzied as suction called it away. The vortex whirled and foamed and spat. He studied the shape it described, a spiral of coarse, elegant, and inevitable. The waters were sinking fast now. The splashing had mounted to a roar. Very soon, it would all be gone. The door to another world sealed up and lost. And that is the interesting thing that he does explore within this, is that it's almost like a Stephen King thingy sort of bit where it's like, okay, this is obviously like a portal to another world, which is why these people are here in the first place, you know, these nubile lovely ladies and so on and so forth, and there's like a family of them. I think there's like 3 if I remember correctly. But yes, so as to continue, he had no choice. He leapt. The circling undertow snatched at him immediately. He barely had time to draw breath before he was sucked beneath the surface and dragged round and round, down and down. He felt himself buffeted against the floor of the pool, then somersaulted as he was pulled inexorably closer to the exit. He opened his eyes. Even if he did so, the current dragged him to the brink and over. The stream took him in its custody and flung him back and forth in its fury. Yeah, that's really the one thing that I have to constantly commend Clive Barker about, is that in comparison with like a lot of other, you know, authors that I've read, most notably here on the horror show, Stephen King, is that there is a very different flow, you know, and with the water stuff here, it most definitely makes sense. But yeah, there is a different flow to his prose, which I appreciate significantly, and it just wows me, because there's a very, dare you say, like kind of like sullen somberness a lot of the time to King stuff, and there is like a very like visceral like vengeance a lot of the time to how Clive approaches prose. And hey, you know, major props in that regard. So yeah, it is the Madonna is a relatively simple story, you know, in the fact that, okay, you know, guy basically is trying to sell a haunted property, and he discovers the spiritual energy that is there, and it is very much of a feminine variety, and it changes some things for him within his life. So yeah, not a standout though, you know, just like The Forbidden wasn't like a supreme standout for me. I enjoyed it, but I felt like the adaptation, you know, that was done with CANDYMAN elevated the material, and that is one of the benefits, as I all too often proclaim here on the horror show, in the fact that like when you're adapting and expanding, when you have short form material and you're kind of making it your own, it's all too often, I mean, it's not always better, but I feel like there's a higher success rate for the sheer fact that you aren't omitting things. You are expanding upon things. And, yeah. But then, and that's the thing, the next story, which is Babel's Children, this is another one where it's barely even horror, you know? I mean, the previous story with what happens, you know, in the Madonna and a particular transformation that transpires, like, yeah, it's definitely horror in that particular regard. But the, you know, Babel's Children, you know, whatever you want to describe it as, this honestly felt so much more like Stephen King stuff that I've read, most notably The Institute, you know? But just without spoiling stuff, there is a woman named Vanessa, and she is very much a free spirit, exploratory, you know, wants to, like, go all over the place, and she had, like, a near raping in one place in Europe, and then she got lost in the Swiss Alps, and so she is adventurous, obviously. And she essentially just stumbles upon this strange, like, I don't want to say cult-like sort of place, but it's most definitely like a secret. It's not even a government facility because it's not affiliated with any particular government. You know, they have people, you know, Nobel Prize winners from, like, all over the globe. But, yeah, it's these people who, they don't even explain how they're keeping the world from, like, mass destruction very well, you know? But there's all of these brilliant minds that are apparently constantly monitoring and, you know, seeing those situations where, yeah, okay, if this goes down because we're monitoring all of the different world powers, but Clive doesn't even really go into much extensive detail about what they actually do, you know, this secret society, this secret sect that is, you know, just monitoring everybody and kind of keeping the peace. It's very paper thin. I did not like this story. You know, I found appreciation in the Madonna, and obviously in the Forbidden I found aspects, especially, you know, with the source material aspect, but I was significantly underwhelmed by, you know, Babel's Children, and the fact that, yeah, Vanessa basically stumbles upon this place, and then she is held against her will, and she gets acquainted with one older dude in particular, who's been there for, you know, quite some time, and kind of shed some light. But really, this is not a scary tale. It's interesting and relatively unique because of the fact that, you know, back in the 80s when we were still, you know, caught in the grips of, you know, the Cold War and all that stuff, which is when Clive wrote this, that's where I guess it makes a little bit more sense. But it's plotting, it's boring. She tries to escape a few times. She does go badass level at one particular point and kind of, you know, mobilizes some of these, you know, older, brilliant minds that have been there for a while, but I just, it is easily, it might even be the weakest in my estimation of all of the stories in the Books of Blood up till this particular point. And, you know, I'm on the 5th volume, there's only one more left to go, and so that's where I'm like, alrighty then, I'll Ace Ventura that shizzle. But really, the ultimate standout is the final story, In the Flesh. Yeah, also a amazing 2-part song from Pink Floyd The Wall, which I constantly contend is the greatest album ever created, and so much so that, you know, everybody from, you know, My Chemical Romance to, you know, so many have like kind of copped the vibe and the feel of the epicness and whatnot. But so in this particular story, In the Flesh, which, like, when it was released in the States, it was very apparent that they put that at the forefront for a good reason, because it is definitely the most imaginative, and it's also in a lot of ways the most, like, in the vein of the Books of Blood, because of the fact that if you remember way back to the very first story in Volume 1, where, you know, talking about, like, the roads of the dead, and how there's almost like a purgatorial sort of situation that so many of them find themselves in the grasp of, and that's what this story really explores significantly. So you've got this guy Cleveland. He's a 30-year-old, you know, marijuana pusher, and I don't know how much different the, you know, laws were in the 80s and, you know, the UK in comparison with here in the States, but here in the deadly desert of Arizona, yeah, it's at least recreationally illegal. So stuff, but that's a relatively new development to keep in mind, and so. Yeah, dude is in his 3rd stint as in prison, for God's sake. You're like, man, we're in prison for the third time, but, you know, he was kind of finding himself in there for non-violent crimes, and it's something that is made relatively apparent. So much so that he actually has one of the, like, main guard, like, officer kind of guys, like, hey, there's this kid coming in, and he's really young, he's like 22, and he looks 17, and that's where I'm just like, oh, Clive, I see what you're doing there, boy. And he even refers to, you know, this boy Billy, you know, Billy Boy, and all of the, I just kept thinking Half-Baked a lot of the time, where he's just like Squirrel Master, you know, taking care of Kenny, which is funny. But yeah, so it is very much of that sort of situation, in the fact that there's this kid who the older dude Clive is kind of trying to protect and keep an eye on, and there's this dude Lol, if I remember correctly, who, you know, wants that sweet butt cherry. And yeah, but as you peel back the layers, though, and you realize why Kid is actually there, Kid has a connection with a grandfather who was actually hung back at that you know, particular correctional facility decades before, back when they still had that sort of corporal punishment aspect, and he committed a crime specifically to get in there and try to just discover history of said grandfather. And that's where I can't really spoil much beyond that, because it really goes into some interesting places, most notably with cities, and how there is like a virtual dream-like purgatorial city for those who have murdered other people. And yeah, it is a like Catholic purgatory sort of situation, and it's reserved specifically for those who have killed other people, taken other lives. And this kid is trying to investigate and trying to explore and trying to figure out some, you know, familial history. And it's most definitely the most unique of the 4 stories here. That's why it was, you know, just like put at the forefront in the initial United States release of Volume 5 back when it was first coming out. And yeah, man, I was significantly impressed with this story. I didn't really like where it went in. There's almost like an epilogue sort of bit, without spoiling stuff, where it goes into you know, coping drug use with a particular character, and I didn't necessarily think that that was ultimately necessary, you know, but that the interplay, and also from a dreamlike standpoint, this is the story that was legitimately the standout for me, with good reason. Like, if you're gonna check out any of the 4 stories, obviously, if, you know, you're into, you know, Tony Todd's epic performance CANDYMAN, I mean, legitimately, it has every right to just have the notoriety and the reverence that it entails and stuff. But that short story is just okay, and you know, the Madonna was fine enough, I suppose, but yeah, Babel's Children, or Babel's Children, whatever you want to classify it as properly, but In the Flesh, man, was obviously the standout here, and it is very fascinating from a psychedelic standpoint, from a dream standpoint, and from a philosophical standpoint too, because it does bring faith into the equation and the possibility of reincarnation. And there's actually a few different stories that do that here, actually. The Babel's Children does actually look into that just a little bit with some frog aspects, and, you know, without spoiling stuff significantly. And then also the whole, you know, gentrification aspect that I mentioned, which is prevalent within the first 2 stories. And so, sadly, I feel like Volume 5 is the weakest of the bunch so far. I'm extremely excited for the next installment, Volume 6, because it has The Last Illusion, which, you know, gets some more action going on in there for all of you fans of Lord of Illusions. And so it's the first appearance of Harry, if I'm not mistaken. But very excited about that. There's a couple other bangers that I have heard some significantly solid stuff about. But yeah, once again, if you are into a visual representation of stuff, tapping the vein, this is a 4-volume series from back in the 1980s, where Clive Barker was adapting, and you've got like the Pig Blood Blues, I think, is another one that I'm really excited to read. And yeah, I recently acquired Hell's Event is another one. Yeah, I recently acquired all 4 of those volumes, and it's before Clive was like really breaking into the realm of comic books. And, you know, he obviously went on to significant success in the 80s and 90s, and, you know, throughout and further. And this is the first time proper that I am announcing to all of the audiences and you know, peeps in the YouTubies, that I am curating a panel at the Phoenix I guess it's called Fan Fusion, I don't know, it was always Phoenix Comic-Con, and then, you know, SDCC decided to, like, hit everybody with those sort of, like, yeah, Comic-Con is our thing, and you're just like, alright, whatever. But finally returning, they haven't done one since 2019 because of, you know, pandemics and all kinds of craziness and, you know, schedule bumping and whatever, but Memorial Day weekend, we're still trying to actually finalize the specific day. I think it's going to be that Saturday, but I am doing a panel along with Cecil Laird and with Robert Dole that we are very excited to present, which is going to be all about who is the king of modern horror. So we're talking from like probably the 50s onward. And so it's going to be Stephen King versus Clive Barker. So it's going to be a crossover Barker at the moon, you know, and hail to Stephen King sort of bit. And it's going to be a very intriguing discussion because of the fact that while, you know, King has been significantly more prolific with everything that he's done as far as, like, you know, just publishing stories and shorts and novels and everything like that at such a rapid rate, and Clive hasn't really done a lot in a little while, but we're going to explore the fact that Clive is arguably a little bit more of a talent in the fact that he paints, he has made a number of video games, he's directed a lot more movies than just Maximum Overdrive, you know, and good ones to boot, you know, and he's designed action figures with Todd McFarlane, and so it's going to be a very interesting kind of debate, discussion, discourse sort of thing, and us at the Horror Show, we are very excited to present this to all of you in a live setting, but we're also going to be videotaping it, and yes, it's going to end up here on the YouTube channel at one particular point. So who is the king of horror in your estimation? Is it Steve? Is it Clive? You know, are they just so drastically different in their approach that you can't decide? I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. But yes, there will be another final installment of the Books of Blood, which will be coming next month, and very excited for that. But yeah, kind of debating if I'm gonna continue through, you know, Damnation Game and Great and Secret Show and all that different stuff, or if I would prefer to, I mean, maybe shift over to Lovecraft You to Death, which is another thing that I've been teasing for a little bit, and maybe explore some more of his stuff properly, you know, aside from when Robert and I did Color Out of Space and compared the short story to the feature film with Nick Cage. So, I don't know, guys. What do you think? We appreciate the comments, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, all that silliness. Yes, it is very much a part of the process, but massively appreciated. And I have been Jaime En Fuego. You can find more on all social media sectors like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, here on the YouTubies, obviously. And yeah, if you want to become a patron and give a little bit of support to the show significantly, you know, just hey, we bow our heads. It is majorly appreciated. And if you want to request a film review, commentary, we still do boogie boxes, which is pretty rad status, and a personally curated box of radness from Cecil, myself, and, you know, the rest of the crew here. But yeah, everybody, that's gonna be the end of Barker at the Moon. And yeah, I guess until next time when we reconvene a month from now, remember to stay scared and read Clive Barker. But honestly, in this case, the only one that I would really recommend is In the Flesh.